Welcome to the L.A.B platform, where our goal is simple. We want to advance liberation one conversation at a time. I'm honored to have my guest, and on the other side, we're talking about putting our hearts back into teaching. I'll see you on the next side. Hello.
Hi.
Listen, I don't want to, I would rather you tell the people who you are, what you do, why you do it, and who you do it for.
Okay. So hello. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm
Absolutely.
so excited to be here. I'm Dr. Courtney Rose, and that question, what do I do and who do I do it for? Such a beautiful question. So currently, we'll start with my job role. I'm a professor at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. I teach in ed policy studies, but most of my courses lie in social and cultural foundations of education and teaching diverse populations. So I'm kind of that bridge between policy and practice. That's how I like to think about it. And the self, but we'll get there. And I teach primarily pre-service teachers, so those who are studying to become teachers, but a few of my students are currently teaching, and we're even branching out and getting some folks from psychology and other programs, so that's been really exciting. I also do some educational consulting on the side with those milliseconds of free time that I have between my courses. And I focus on innovative strategies in culturally relevant pedagogy and other things that blend identity, curriculum, instruction, and how we infuse who we are into our work. And who do I do it for? I do it for I've been thinking, that's a really good question to ask me at this moment. And my answer is probably going to be different than one that I've ever said before. But I do it for recently that little girl who I used to be, who struggled so hard to figure out where her voice belonged, and didn't believe in the strength and power of it. And so I do it for her and for anybody else who resonates with that.
I think that's a perfect segue because that's where I want to go. Oh, yeah. Talk to me about that little girl. If you had to describe her, introduce her, say she's walking in with you, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
and you're introducing her to a group of people, how do you describe her? And yeah.
Well, she's full of emotions. I think that was the one thing that made it kind of challenging for me as a little girl, and now, right? Like I feel everything all the time to a degree that sometimes feels heavy, right? And I think my mom gave me a journal when I was really little. I was trying to think of exactly how old I was, but I think I was probably my first one, maybe 7, thinking about the house we were living in at the time. And that finally became this place where I could write everything that I was feeling down. And I think it was the first time that I started to realize that I had so many feelings and I had so many things to say. I mean, I've always been a talker. I've always been very expressive, but when I started going to school, I think I started realizing that sometimes the way that I talked wasn't welcome, or the things, like how expressive I was problematic. I got talks a lot on all of my things. It was the only place, in kindergarten, first and second grade, we got S's and N's, and talking was the one space that I always got an N. Then when I got to middle school and high school, people started critiquing how I talked, right? Like, oh, you talk too white, you're this, you're that. and my identity started coming into question around that. And so for a while, I started figuring out how I could shape shift a little bit, right? To make sure that I was fitting in, but standing out at the same time. And it was exhausting. It was an exhausting journey to figure out how all these pieces of me fit, and figuring out how to, at the time, right, this is how I was thinking about it, make others see how valuable all of that was, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I resonate with it in that, if I could think back to my experience, I was probably considered an Oreo by many
Mm,
growing up, where for me, because I was in honors classes back then, right, when that was a thing, and I was like one of two black kids in there, or because, just like you said, like I did when I was in school, I learned, because it was pressed upon me, to code
mhm.
switch very, very quickly. So when I came in, I enunciated, yes sir, no sir, military family, like that was just what it was. And that led to a lot of identity issues, because am I who I am at school? Am I who I am at home? Am I really an
Mm,
Oreo? Is my brand, if you will, of blackness acceptable?
yes.
Right. Um, and so I resonate so much with that. What would you say were some of the ways in which you helped, like, this helped you navigate that?
Mhm.
Um, people, places, thing. What were some of the things that helped you?
So I had a couple places where, and I write about this a lot. So I went to, my mom had a rule, like you couldn't just sit around her house in the summertime. So you had to like find something to do. And so I did a couple of things, but one of the places that I landed was summer camp. It ended up in the long picture being the thing that opened my eyes to everything that I do now. But I, it was this one place where exactly who I was all I needed to be, right? And my friends, who I'm still really close with, the people who there's 5 of us, but we are really close to this day. It's over 2 decades of friendship. And um, we always say if we met each other at school, we probably wouldn't have been friends for this long, because we wouldn't have like the rules, the norms, and social practices that govern school wouldn't have afforded us the space to get to know each other and see each other the way that we did within the context of camp. And so, and we joke about this, we come from pretty different backgrounds. We lived in the same neighborhood or the same area, obviously, but we're line us up in a room and we're very different. But we had this space, this freedom to just be. And that's what, to me, at least this camp was. It was just a space to just be. It had some of the elements of the culture of schooling, but that was more so what people were bringing with them. And we quickly broke that down. So I think having that space where I was just able to just be myself, and nobody wanted me to be anything else, and that little quirkiness that was the piece of me that I loved the most was celebrated and, pulled out and awarded and rewarded. And, I became a counselor pretty young. And, watching every summer, this other kids coming up behind me having that experience too, and being a part of cultivating that experience. I mean, I was 16 when I became a counselor. So that opposite experience I was having at camp with what I was going through at school, it just, the flip switched, where it was just like, just be. And whoever is going to be in your life is going to be in your life. And whoever is going to see who you are is going to see who you are. But my girls know like I said, there's actually 4 of us that have remained super close. And we say all the time, like, thank you for just letting me just be,
Mm,
like, and we'll always be that for each other. We've always been that for each other. So I can shout them out: Jordan, Amber, Jessica. Those were the first four. And then I've had kind of that group that allowed me to do that, and that I did that for and with in each kind of stepping stone of my life. And I learned to look for that, like find the people, find the spaces where you can just be. But that initial experience was with those four women.
Yeah, I think that, when you think about carving out or at least taking space in that way,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a very liberating experience, right? To feel like what you are, who you are, is good enough. The freedom to just be.
Mm-hmm.
I even think to this day we find many who struggle is feeling like they can just be, particularly when everything around us is calling us to um, put on airs, if you will,
Yeah.
right? Social media, relationships, you know, from those who are in that phase of life, dating, from what I understand, all those things. It's calling us to, it's making us believe that we aren't enough.
Yeah.
Um, and it makes me think, like, how do we help people come to the realization? And you talk about you cultivating that experience for others when you saw people coming behind you. What was that like?
Mm-hmm.
How did you help them, and how did your experience personally help
Mm-hmm.
them cultivate that experience for them?
Well, I think, and I think I've been leaning into this idea more and more lately. It was definitely a co-created thing, right?
Yeah.
Because all those women that I went through camp with, we all became counselors at the same time. And the guys who were at the camp too, most of us had been there since we were at least, I don't know, 9. And so it was ingrained and embedded in the culture of that space, right? Where you kind of, if you were bringing anything opposite of that, you were the one who stood out. And so this is why I always tell people, right, when you're thinking about transforming school spaces, you need to have it become embedded within the culture of that environment. It needs to be embedded within the culture of your classroom, right? And so for each of us, it started with I think us, right? We all had each other to lean on, but that cultivated that self-work for each other, within ourselves as individuals. But when you combine that collective energy, that's really what did it. That's really what helped to cultivate that community, was that it wasn't a single person being like, hey, this is how it should be. It was all of us were in that community, designing that culture, creating that community together. And it was a really powerful example of the strength of the collective, right? But also each of us were allowed to be unique individuals within that, right? And so how you find that balance and the beauty of that balance is, it's really something that, like I said, I didn't know then. I wouldn't figure it out until 3 years into my college career. Like,
Mhm.
that experience would be the catalyst for everything that I've done since. And so, because it was the first place where I felt that balance
Yeah.
between being able to be every unique piece of who I am and still be welcomed into this collective community that saw me and knew me and that valued all of those pieces of me.
I think that that's, you know, so much is tied to how we define and how we engage in community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we, um, over the last year, getting to be in the same spaces digitally and being able to connect and share space with each other, I think, you know, one of the things that I've noticed over the last year, whether it be in IG spaces, just teachers in general, or Black Teacher Graham, or even the larger, understandings of community are
Yeah.
very different. Like when I say community, I think certain people hear something different than what I may be saying.
Mm.
Um, so when you say community, paint the picture for us. What does it mean to truly exist in community?
Yeah. I think when people hear community, they think of this like kumbaya, like we have to all get along all the time and agree with each other. No, like, you know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
think community is that group or that setting where you are, like I said before, finding that balance between being uniquely individual, but also welcomed into the collective. And as part of that, that you welcome the tensions that come with that, right? You welcome the moments of disagreement because they push you deeper into who you are. You welcome those moments of um, just sometimes anger, sometimes
Mhm.
sadness, sometimes just the most intense joy that you can experience. And you are all just embracing all of that together, right? You're welcome the struggle as much as you welcome the triumphs, right? You welcome the failures just as much as you welcome the wins. And you do that in a way that allows everyone to grow. And you're constantly pushing for that growth. And I think that's the best part about being in community, is because you have people that just want to see you be better than you were yesterday. And that to me is what community is we're constantly pushing each other, challenging each other, supporting each other, validating each other, um, and all from a space of love. And that's, to me, you're there because it has that, at the end of the day, the feeling, the emotion that you can go back to is love. And that's when
Yeah.
I think we've achieved community rather than just a group of people who go to the same place and do the same work.
Yeah, I think that what's been riddled in our understandings of community is convenience,
Mm,
right? Um, Social media, digital platforms, they make it easier for us to connect. It makes it easier for us to collaborate. And we don't really have to work as hard to connect with like-minded people,
mm,
right?
yeah.
So when there is moments of tension, friction, misunderstanding, and the like, it becomes more about the territory you carve out and who you are around than it is about, no, I really want to connect with you and build with you because we are in community, right? Like we because of the convenience, I don't have to engage,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because of that lack of engagement, because we don't have to face what may be wrong in ourselves and each other, we can choose to believe whatever we want or whatever facade or whatever we have crafted for ourselves because we're not existing in community because of convenience,
Absolutely.
right? And so, to your point, love should be the motivating factor because love should be wrapped in honesty, truth, transparency, and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you said something that made me think and reflect, even on my own practice, is like it has to be embedded into the culture of your room, the culture of where you are and how you exist. Sometimes, though, we get together and we come with different understandings.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that work?
Flexibility. I mean, I just did I'm currently in a module with my students on change agents, or being agents of change, and how to conceptualize the role of the educator as an agent of change. And we broke down like what are the characteristics of a change agent. And one of the things that we came to was flexibility, because I might have this vision for what I think you need, right? Or for what I think what an effective classroom looks like, what an effective learning environment is, what a meaningful learning experience is. But once I learn you, once I meet you, once I know you, all of that changes, right? Because I made those visions, I had those visions and those ideas before I knew you, right? And so part of that is once things change and as we recognize that we're constantly evolving, the world is constantly evolving, that I might come in with different perceptions and preconceived notions about what we're going to do here than you, then that's when the compromise, the community, the conversation, all of that happens and the co-construction phase happens. And I think as educators, we can sometimes view that our role in that co-construction process is to dictate what's going to happen, but it's just to facilitate the process, which might look like providing structure, guidance, context, framing, addressing misconceptions, addressing, just, oh, well, I understand why you have that perspective, but here's the reality. And so now that we know that this is the reality, maybe we have a different perspective on things, but it's certainly not to dictate necessarily. And when I come in as dictator versus facilitator and co-constructor, that's where those tensions actually become roadblocks to progress, right? And to building that community. Versus I'm coming in here to facilitate your growth, to facilitate your learning, to co-construct the experience we have in here. Well, then you've opened everything up and welcomed your students into the process, welcomed their parents and families into the process with healthy boundaries, right? And so, because we want to acknowledge that, right? And so I think that's the piece that it's just a flipping of the conceptualization of our role within the classroom space.
And that's when there are many teacher prep programs that will tell you that seated, silent, pencils moving, that silent transitions, some schools still do that, that, this lifeless understanding of learning is paramount to student growth. That this belief that, for me, in my opinion, is just riddled with deficit ideology, right? Because they shouldn't be allowed to talk because they don't have anything to say, right? The powerful nature of co-creation, emphasis on co, means that we as educators have to hold, reframe what we think control is.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, for me, is why I frame everything that I do through a lens of liberation, because I strongly believe it's not us controlling or constraining, it's us unleashing.
Yes.
How do we get educators who have been formed in ideologies and understandings of teaching that say you must control, particularly when it's students who look like you and I? How do we get them to see, really, there is brilliance already existing before you got here, and your job is to unleash it? Your job is to co-create.
So I think that starts before they get in the classroom, right? I think a lot of times,
please.
we
Sorry,
think this is something that we're gonna just learn on the job, but we know once you get us in the room and we have the pressures of all the other factors that are going on, especially if you have a brand new first year teacher. I think perhaps if it's someone who's a little bit more seasoned in dealing with the other components of this work, then that's something that maybe can happen in continuing professional development, that that has to be rooted in this kind of ideology and framework. But to me, where we're losing the battle is that what you just said, the teacher prep programs are still really rooted largely in that same ideology, that same framework of control, 100% compliance, of like what effective teaching looks like. And I see it shifting and changing in pockets. A big red flag to me is if you're calling your program like a teacher training program or a teacher prep program versus a teacher education program. Because if I'm preparing you for battle or I'm training you for something, right, then I'm already saying I have more of the tools than you have. And so a part of the work that I do is I think teachers need to experience an environment rooted in that reality and that ideology and that framework before they can facilitate the development of one. So many of us never experienced that. And so now you're telling me it can be done, but I don't know what that feels like. And so a lot of what I do with my students is who don't look like me, a lot of them, but they themselves have never really sat in a room where they've experienced that. And I invite them in for class discussion and even tell them, I care about what you have to say because you've lived in this world, you've sat in classrooms, you've been in school buildings, you've probably sat in a high school more recently than I have, right? And so the knowledge that you have, the expertise that you have, the insight, the perspectives, the understandings that you have are so necessary in this room.
But you have the 2 letters in front of your name though. So doesn't that make you the expert in all things?
And we literally just talked about this, and it's so timely. This conversation is so timely. But we literally just had this conversation where we broke down, the social structure. We went all deep into sociology, where we broke down the social structure, social hierarchies, how our roles and our norms get, like, why is what I have to say more valuable than what you have to say, right? Why? And one of them said, well, because you have a doctorate. And I said, and you could also have a doctorate. You just don't have one yet, right? You just don't have one yet. So, and even with my doctorate, it doesn't mean that what I have to say is more valuable than what you have to say. It just means that perhaps I've had the opportunity to engage with research in a different way or how to construct knowledge in a different way. But it doesn't mean that what I have to say is more valuable. It just means that I have an experience that has been given more value. And there's a difference in that.
That's good.
Right? There's a difference between I have more value and what I've experienced or what I've been born into or what I have been given is seen as more valuable.
More valuable.
Right? And so when they hear that, it kind of like shifts. It's in how I design our class assignments. Right now, I'm in a battle with them, a battle of love, trying to say, hey, y'all, I know you know how to summarize these texts, but guess what? I already know what they say. I want to know how you feel about what they say. I want to know what they're bringing up for you. I want to know where you've seen what they say in your experiences as a student and how you think that it might manifest in your practice as an educator. And then we talk about the process of that. And so many of them are like, this is the first time a professor has ever asked me what I think and feel about what we're reading. And so I really don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say the truth, right? And so it's having those experiences that break down what they think education should look like. And we also talk about the difference between schooling and education.
Talk about it.
That I hope they take with them and apply in their classrooms when they take that position at the head of the room, or hopefully a seat in a circle where everyone's sitting on equal footing, right? Where they're looking at their students, regardless of the color of their skin or the neighborhood that they live in or the socioeconomic status of the community that they're working in and see people who have something to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we shook up the role of, I'm professor, I have a doctorate, whoop-de-whoop, like that's great. But you are people with something to say. And I can't do what I do if you don't say your truth, if you don't bring it here, right? I can't acknowledge misconceptions if I'm just assuming. And also I could waste a lot of time assuming that you have misconceptions that you don't, or assuming that you have knowledge gaps that you don't. And some of our babies are sitting in classrooms like, yes, we know this, but people are assuming that they have knowledge gaps that they don't.
All because we won't listen intently. Right?
Paulo Freire writes about the banking model, that we assume that our babies come to us empty.
I just talked about this.
I bet you did.
I literally just had this. On Sunday, I was talking about professional development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how professional developments assume are structured in that same model. Like, we're going to sit all you educators down and we're going to tell you, right? We're going to deposit what it is that we want from you. And there is no understanding that I already came with wealth, right? When I got here, my wealth came with me. And I don't necessarily need your deposit in order to be wealthy, right? And it's just like you're saying, that this deficit, this almost like capitalism has taken hold of how we even educate, right?
Yeah.
You come empty, I deposit. What you have, matter of fact, I don't value it. And so I'm going to give you what it is that I value. And then I'm going to ask you to give it back to me in the way that I gave it to you, because what I want is an echo of my voice, not an extension of yours.
Ooh, yes. Were you sitting in my class last week? Because almost verbatim, like literally almost verbatim, I told them, like, I'm not trying to create minions, right? That's not my goal. I don't want a million. I'm Dr. Rose. I don't need 135 more, right? Because I got that covered. But I would, this is a space where I hope you cultivate your voice, where you figure out what you believe and what you don't. I'm going to give you framing. I'm going to find some readings and videos that I hope push your perspectives and push your thinking and help you to look at things from perspectives that you haven't been forced to look through before, right?
Yeah.
That's my job. My job is not to tell you how to think and how to feel about things, but it is to create the opportunities for you to think and feel, right? And yeah, like, there's some structural things that I, knowing that I'm preparing them for the next phase, like that I try to coach and help and guide, but it's not my job isn't to tell you what you should think or what you should feel. It's not. Because I haven't lived your life. I haven't had the experiences that you've had. And so, I'm just going to present everything to you. That's why we start with Baldwin's A Talk to Teachers. And the line that always hangs with all my students every semester is that the purpose of education is to give, and I'm paraphrasing, the student everything and allow them to come to their own conclusions. But when we do that, we create a very dangerous person, because they are able to think for themselves. And no society truly wants that. That hits them in the gut every time, right? Because it starts to make them think of all these experiences that they've had where somebody told them, well, how you feel doesn't matter. What you think doesn't matter. Don't do that, do this, because this is going to be more valuable. To who? For whom? Right?
Which then, to further tease out the understanding of capitalism in our schooling experiences, the grade that I give you,
Mm-hmm.
right, is supposed to signify the worth and dignity of what you have brought forth.
Yep.
And not to mention how subjective grading is, period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um more than we're probably willing to admit in ourselves, we will give certain students a certain grade because of how they've presented and what is pleasing to us, and we will give other students another grade because of how what they have done has been an affront or has pushed us in ways we don't want to be pushed.
Yeah.
And because I have the power to disperse wealth,
Yeah.
I now am going to lord that over you as if, right, that is the means whereby which I'm going to get the result I want.
Yeah.
Which is why we have students who are like, I reject it and I don't care what grade you give me because
Yep.
I don't think that that is worth anything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I give my student, I just gave them this example. And so my assignments are mostly reflection based and whatnot. But so I don't necessarily grade them on the content of what they're saying. They're graded on the depth of the analysis, because that's what I'm trying to build, is how deeply, if I have to ask why and how too many times, like why are you making that connection? How, like that, I want them to get used to the depth of that, right? And so I told them I had a student who wrote a paper, one of the reflections, and it was in a fully online class, so they never saw me, but other than the intro video that I put up for all my classes, so she knew I was a Black woman, whatnot, but wrote her truth and wrote about all of the very negative experiences that she'd had with Black people, particularly Black people in low-income communities, that shaped her feelings about Black people, right? In
Mhm.
relation to some of the things we were reading. And my student said, well, she failed, right? And I was like, no, because she did the assignment. Now, what that triggered for me was, oh, there are some clear misconceptions here. There are some clear things going on here that it's now my role to present some different perspectives. That's my role here, is to
Mhm.
present some different perspectives. And that is exactly what I did, right? We watched a whole bunch of they were the whole class, not just her, the whole class was assigned a whole bunch of videos on stereotyping and unconscious bias and all this kind of stuff that until that point hadn't been fully built into this course yet, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what it is. When somebody says something that is jarring to you, it's a moment to engage. And I think so often,
Mhm.
to your point about grades, when somebody does something that's offensive or feels like an affront to who we are, or something that we feel and value, or to us and our identity, we shut down and that's it. Oh, you got an F because all this is wrong. You can't think and feel that way. No, I validate her experience in that
Yeah.
she had some very real experiences that nobody at that time helped her process, so that it didn't become this big thing, this bigger
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
So now it's my job to educate through that,
Mhm.
to engage and not shut down. As hard
Yeah.
as it is, right? But to engage that and say, oh, interesting. Have you read this? Have you right? And also not to single out.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Which is, I'm going to say this, but I'm honestly, these words have been used so wrong that it's almost
mhm,
triggering for me to say this, but like creating that safe space.
mhm,
Um, Now, when I have heard traditionally safe space, it's been used almost as this needs to be an accepting space for my closet racism. Not that you can't challenge me or you can't push me at all, but like, no, you just need to accept me as this is who I am and this is what is acceptable.
mhm,
Right. Um, and so for me, I like, first I want to affirm that, right? Like, the idea that we can hear something that would shake us a little bit and then be like, huh, tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
That switch, I mean, now that might look different depending on who the person is, right? And who we are and what the relationship is, but it's needed now more than I think at any time that I can remember, um, in my lifetime. Like,
Yeah.
we're at a space right now where that human, heartfelt element of engagement, right? That's fueled by a love for humanity, a fueled by a love for, you know, whether it be liberation or what those things are that motivate you, is needed now more than ever because we'll take something as seemingly simple as humanitarian aid and we'll make it something that is divisive. We'll take something like masks and make it something that's divisive. We'll take something, and all of it feels, it comes from this understanding of, or a lack of understanding of, what true community is, bringing it back full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think one thing my students know is that I think sometimes people are scared to have these conversations,
Yeah.
and I am not, right? I approach them with a lot of care. I approach them with a lot of I guess care is in love, right? But if you're going to throw something in the ring, I think students sometimes learn if I say something really jarring, then it'll back everything up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No, we're gonna go. Oh, and the way that I go is to invite others into the conversation too. Now, this was a class where they didn't speak to each other. I think I've had a couple of times where those kinds of things happen in class,
Right.
and we had already created, norms around it. But that starts in the beginning. Like, you're not gonna. This is something I always caution people about. You have to build the community in order to create a space where it's not hiding my closet racism, but it is feeling safe to speak. Diane Watson writes, like, if we can't talk about these things and we can't address the unconscious ways that racism and sexism and homophobia and all of these things are operating within us, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we've accepted it as the way that it is, right? And she has this conversation around the way we utilize and even sometimes weaponize the term urban to cover up how we're talking about and framing Black and brown youth.
100%.
So when I hear my students using urban, minority, this and that, I ask them, well, who are you talking about? And they'll say, well, urban, yes, but who are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know why. And I say, because if you don't unpack that, and they'll say, well, I don't want to sound racist. Well, is what you're saying racist? Is what you're saying, right? An overgeneralization, a stereotype, a fallacy, you know what I'm saying, rooted in your experience with a few versus your opinion and perspective of everyone in that group. And it helps them to then, because now I've said we have to say the race words here. It makes them think about where what they're about to say comes from. So you start to hear people saying things like, well, I used to think but now I realize X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's giving people no room around it.
Yes.
You have to face yourself now. And that's what I feel like, welcoming that conversation. It makes people think before they speak now.
Yes. Yes. To question.
And to sit with where this is coming from. And it's not, foolproof, but it's had, it's produced some exciting dialogue that I think my students have appreciated because they're not getting it anywhere else.
Yes.
They're not getting it anywhere else. And it's what I think in these PDs, if we want educators to really move that needle, but you need to have someone who is capable of facilitating that conversation in a way that it does not enact, that it doesn't result in harm. And
Yeah.
that takes a very specific skill set.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, to your point, so, I said this a while back, but like Liberation Lab started from a place of being silenced, being in a school where I wanted to work through the school to bring, liberatory thought and action to how we approached, our primarily Hispanic and then African American population. And even in that space, well, not even, right? Because it's part of the chief export of America, but anti-Blackness was running rampant. And so I knew and know that when I'm talking to majority context, they want data. They need numbers and, proof. Got to be able to prove it. And so I showed them, based upon me just pulling the data for our, we had like a paycheck system, like a monitoring type of deal, and showing them like that Black students accounted for, 11% of the population, but upwards of 35% of their deductions. How is that possible? Right? Unless something is there. Well, they think about what we're saying here. Right. And I say that to say, one of the things that I love about your platform and who you are is that your work serves as a mirror for folks, a mirror that they can't escape from. And a mirror that's held up in love, but love engages what's wrong.
Yeah.
Love won't let you keep that racist spinach in your teeth. No, we're gonna get that out. Please, let's remove that.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to ask, as as we round out our time, I want to ask about the self-reflection piece. Now, let me tell you where when you recently put up a post about going to get your wipers changed.
Yes.
And it was just this honest, raw, self-reflective moment that I love about you, because I do it myself and I resonate when I see it in somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about that experience and how you made this beeline for education that I was like, yes.
Bobby, let me tell you, I had the little experience, and then I was thinking about that for the rest of the day. So I posted that probably around 4:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I went to the place at 12. So I was thinking about it all damn day, doing all my work, and it's just in my mind all day. And I was like, that was such an experience. Like, you just sit and think about it. So yeah, so I went to the auto parts store to get windshield wipers. I've been putting it off, but I live in Miami and just raining every day. So I was like, let me go get these replaced. And I don't know my sizes, my windshield wipers, because I never remember them. So I go to the thing, they put them in the little system, and there was a white person working behind the desk, and he's like, oh, you need this size and this size. See, I already forgot. And and then there's a long row, and he's like, you can only select from these ones. He gave me they were color coded because your car needs an adapter. Now, I have been to this very place multiple times, and never have they told me I need an adapter or limited my selection. But in my mind, I'm like, he knows what he's talking about. I don't even know the sizes, so why would I question, right?
Yeah.
And then a Black gentleman came over and saw me he probably saw the horror on my face at how much they cost. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, has this always been how much they cost?
Yeah.
But he was like, oh, you should just get these over here because they're cheaper. And I was like, well, and then this is where I had to hold the mirror to myself. He also worked in the store. Okay. And I kept telling him, oh, well, that person told me I need an adapter. And he was like, yeah, what kind of car do you drive? And I said, this. And he's like, just get these. And I was like, yeah, but he told me they needed it. I said this 3 times. Yes, but he told me, don't I need to get the ones with the adapter? And he just pointed to his thing, his badge, and
Okay,
said,
yeah.
I also work here. It's like, you can just follow me to the register. And set me up, hooked me up outside, put the wipers on for me. And as he was leaving, he said, some people are salespeople and some people help people. And I was like, well, go off on me then. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, go off. And I didn't say anything, and I drove off. And I know when something hits me, I kind of get quiet. And so I was driving, I went and did like 6 other things. And then I heard those words again in my head. And I was just like, some people are salespeople and some people help people. Some people teach and some people educate. Also, why was I questioning that man? You know what I'm saying? And his expertise when he also works in there. And it took me on a journey. And I think that is the power of reflection, is it makes you think about, like I said, the whys and hows of things. And you can start to connect these threads. I mean, my students and I, we go from inside the classroom to outside the classroom, inside education to other sectors, back and forth, because it's all connected. And there are lessons everywhere that help us to see how we think and why we think the way we do and how we've become who we are, right? It was just a powerful, just like the connection between how we question the expertise of educators who are in these classrooms every day.
Yeah.
Or we'll listen to the administrator who maybe goes through the rooms, once a month, twice a month, doing 10-second observations, but their expertise, because they're it's that, what are we giving more value to? Who are we giving more value to, and why? Thank you for bringing that back up, because I've been still sitting with that all weekend. Just thinking about what a powerful lesson it was and a reminder of why I do what I do.
Yeah, man, I read it and it's funny. I thought about it for like the next few hours. I did. You write in here. I got the post right here. And it says that, like, the connections you make to education, how people often get taken advantage of, or their opportunities and access unlimited because of how others perceive them, and the way teachers' expertise is often questioned, especially those of us holding traditionally marginalized identities.
Yep. So at the
How many
same time,
times? No,
go ahead.
to your point, quickly, and please go. I've been the person holding the badge, saying, "No, I work here too." I've been that guy and been questioned or not listened to, but they said, "Yeah, I got that. I work here too. I'm telling you, there's more than one way to do this."
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it was a very weird thing, because to feel at the same time like I got taken advantage of, because he felt like, oh, it's just this black chick in here trying to get some, she don't even know what size windshield wiper she needs. Here's a minute for me to boost up sales. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then to turn right around and say to this, to question this man's expertise, who clearly has more expertise than I do, because you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it was just a moment of, wow, how easily we can get outside of ourselves, or to miss those moments where those internalized narratives play even in us.
Absolutely.
And that's what I always tell my students, like, you all are writing about holding and embodying, historically marginalized identities, but then you say things that reproduce those same experiences that you write about experiencing.
Yeah.
Why? Right? And so, that mirror is hard to look at sometimes, and to see that you are part of the problem, right? You're perpetuating the same narratives that in other aspects of your life you work really hard to fight.
Yeah.
And just because you can't see them as easily sometimes, right?
Yes.
And so it's that moment, and a lot of what I do is informed by my work in areas like psychology and sociology and things like that, my
Yeah.
research and interests. But it's that constant, like, if you can't tell yourself what's what, then forget it.
Forget about it.
Forget it. And so I had to call myself to the carpet and just be like, wow, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How I want to ask you two more questions to round out our time. The first is, how do educators begin that journey of holding up the mirror?
Yeah. Um, I would say find I think we're just surrounded by so much noise, right? And I think one of the biggest practices is to find time to just quiet that. So if that's going for a walk, if that's just taking some time for journaling every now and then, or, journaling might not be your thing. So whatever your thing is, find a way that feels authentic to just express yourself and do it alone.
Hmm.
Right? Because you need that silence. And I know that's easier said than done, right? Parents, we live with people, we have kids to take care of. But if you can, even if it's that 5 minutes before you lay your head down to go to sleep, or
Hmm.
that 5 minutes when you're the only person awake for, the first 5 minutes before you wake everybody up to start the day, right? Carve that time out for yourself, or even right before you leave work, just take 5 minutes to just sit at your desk and just jot some things down. So just find that. It could be, right now I'm doing a bunch of things, journaling, drawing, whatever. I just need to get things out, find that. And I think eventually you'll at the beginning, it might just be surface level, how I feel today, although that's not surface, but it might just be like, today was frustrating, or I had a lot on my plate, or things like that. But then slowly you'll get used to just writing about how you feel,
Yeah.
and the deeper things will come up.
Yeah.
And I say just give yourself 5 minutes. If you can just give yourself 5 minutes a day to just sit with yourself. And then if you can build on it, I think that will be a good place to start. Um, and another thing is, I think we have a tendency to ask other people a lot, well, what did you think about this? Before you ask someone else about that thing, write how you feel first.
Hmm.
Before you go to, because a lot of times we're looking for people to either validate something we feel or
Yeah.
tell us that we weren't wrong or whatever.
Yeah.
But get your feelings out and then go talk to somebody. Because I think I think we're getting so used to looking outside of ourselves and looking within,
Yes.
especially in a field that tells us as teachers that we don't have what we need. We don't have enough knowledge and expertise to do that.
Yep.
Trust yourself in that and write it first, and then go talk to that trusted colleague or your partner or your friend or whoever it is that you go to when you need that type of advice. Go to yourself first and then go to that person.
I think that's so good. For me, I think I do have a tendency to because I live in my head a lot,
Mm-hmm.
to rush out before I even think about it and process all the things. Right.
Yeah.
For me, it's noisy in my head a lot,
Yeah.
and going out is part of that. Almost release for me. But I would even say to those who may be listening, for me, I'll use the example close person to me, my wife. When I ask her a question about something that I'm doing, or when I ask her a question or her opinion on something, what I can automatically trust is she's going to tell me the truth.
Mm-hmm.
She's not going to give me the flowery, um, thing that assuages my ego. She's going to be honest with me in love.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we ask people for their opinion only when we can edit the response that we're looking for.
Mm.
And so ask someone who you trust, but know is going to tell you the truth.
Yep.
and not just what you want to hear.
Yep.
So I end our time here with 3 liberatory wishes. If you could wish for 3 things that you think would ultimately change the face of education, schooling, and just liberation in general, what would you wish for?
I wish that we allowed students to express themselves authentically. I think a lot of the ways that we evaluate learning is in the way that we've given value, which is requires people to funnel their voice into 2 or 3 acceptable forms of knowledge expression. So I wish we allowed people to express knowledge more authentically. I wish that we use different frames of cultural frames of reference for how we construct schooling environments, and allowed communities to be a part of that.
Yep.
I don't think we leverage our communities enough, the communities we work in and for and with. And I wish, and this is a political, I wish that we funded them equitably, our schooling spaces, so that we can bring those first 2 to fruition.
That's huge, especially that third one. When we talk about funding, like, people like to talk about how much money you get in the quote unquote hood for teachers, and for students, and it's like, do you know where that money goes though?
Mm-hmm.
Have you even thought about how it doesn't even get to the kid?
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. Thank you for this. I'm going to be thinking about this conversation well beyond this recording. So thank you for sharing space. Thank you for your brilliance, your genius. For those who may not know you and want to tap into what you're doing, support your work, how could they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Dr. Courtney Rose, just my name all squished together as you see it. I should have done what Bobby did and put my handle. But then my consulting business is Ivy Rose Consulting, and it's just ivyroseconsulting.com. If you're interested in any of the services, there's a contact box, and you can just write to me about what you're looking for, and I'll take it from there. But this has been just a beautiful way to start the week. And I thank you for having me.
Listen, I'm honored every time, we get to share space. So thank you for tapping in. And for those listening, man, listen, this is what we do at the lab. We advance liberation one conversation at a time. My guest here has been Dr. Courtney Rose. We're honored to share space with you, Queen. Thank you.